Hey guys, how's it going? Adam here, and today we're going to be talking about the Quality of Life Improvement 3 update that just came out for Hammerting today. It's the newest patch, so stick around, and if you have any questions about specifics about any of the things in this video, I will be releasing videos about this over the week as I have time, so subscribe and stick around, and I will hopefully get to that, but you can leave a comment below letting me know what you'd like to see videos about first. Alright, well with that out of the way, let's get started breaking it down. First up, and probably the most exciting and needed changes are to the farming system. Starting off, plants no longer need to be replanted. They'll just be replanted automatically once they're harvested. This means you'll no longer have that problem where your dwarves pick a crop, use it to make medicine or food or something else, and then without replanting it, and you go back to check on the crops and find you no longer have any of that thing to plant. Next up, they've added a new use for the cave farms. You can now go into them and select to store a crop in there that you've harvested, so the dwarves will automatically go and put the crop away in the cave farm, rather than just leaving a billion of sacks of barley or whatever on the ground, blocking your view of the game and probably making the, game run worse. So that's a very important and needed fix, so that's nice. Within this new system, you can also set the amount of crops to maintain, kind of like the other recipes in the game. This means that only that many of the crop will be harvested and stored. Once it's reached that amount, then it'll just stop being harvested. If you don't set a maintain value, it mentions that the cave farm will just treat it like it did before, and any crop will just be harvested whenever it's done. This is just a good way to make sure the dwarves aren't wasting time and resources harvesting things that you don't even need anymore and even filling up the inventory, so that'll be good. It also seems they've updated the AI for farmers in general. As you can read, it mentioned the role used to be on an old AI system, so by updating it to the newer one, it should just make everything run smoother and better. Then also, now harvesting your crops is a specific job of the farmer's role, so maybe it'll now grant them XP towards farming and stuff like that, and overall just make the maintaining of harvesting crops just a smoother process in general. It also seems like they've added a bit more complexity to the farming profession. As they always have, plants reach different stages of growth as they're growing, but now it looks like at each stage it might require different levels of care and resources to continue to grow. So now you gotta make sure that you set a farmer to kind of take care of your crops and watch over them, or else you're just gonna be left with a ton of crops stuck at one level of growth. And finally, just a few notes about the new farming updates. First off, they've added tooltips kind of explaining what's required for crops at different levels, so that'll be important so you actually know what you're doing with the new changes. It looks like if you're going to set a crop to be stored in a cave farm, you have to set a maintaining amount, which makes sense so you don't just accidentally fill up your entire cave farm with something random like just mushrooms and then not have room to store other things. And finally there, it mentions that the harvesting priority will be set by the hauling priority in the cave farm, so make sure to set that properly or else you're going to have an inventory full of wheat when you really need mushrooms and medicine. Next up, and my personal favorite from this patch, is the adding of automatic selling, which will definitely make the economy and overworld management way easier and a lot less tedious in the late game. As the name implies, now you can set things you craft to be automatically sold to the overworld once they're created. It will always try to sell it to the location that'll pay the most, but it mentions it'll only update from time to time, so that leads me to believe that it's not always going to check every time that it trades, rather like a set period of time it'll check who's paying the most for it. So you're going to lose a little bit of gold, but in my mind, that is completely worth it, and I imagine if it checked every time you trade it, every location, what they're paying, it might lead to some performance issues, so I think it is a definitely worth it trade-off. It's also worth noting that you can set the trade relation requirement for a faction for you to be able to trade with them. This is important, that way you're not giving weapons and fortifications to factions that you're actively trying to destroy and kind of fighting yourself. And then there at the very bottom, one final note on trading in general is they've added a 4th demand level, so now you can go out there and earn yourself a little bit of extra gold if people really, really need something. Next up, we have the last major one, I believe, for this patch, which is the implementation of achievements. They've been in the game for a little bit, as in you could see them on Steam and know how to earn them, but they just haven't unlocked when you've done the thing, so now they actually will. It's worth noting, you have to start a new game to earn achievements, so you can't go one of your old saves and just automatically get everything, which is kind of unfortunate, but I get it. And finally, you can just check out a list of achievements right there, and I will also put a link to all the achievements on Steam down in the description below, so go and check that out. Just because the major ones are out of the way doesn't mean other cool things aren't in store. Like, for starting off here, we have new changes to the carts to where there are now specific carts for hauling and for dwarves to ride in. That'll just be a nice change overall, so dwarves aren't waiting to hop in a cart while it's hauling other stuff. When you load one of your old saves, this will actually be updated within that save, so that'll be cool. You don't have to completely restart your games that you like. And finally, carts can now perform refuel and repair jobs. Another really cool change with this patch that I'm excited for is the addition of overworld location upgrades. So now you can actually feel like you're having more of an effect on the war going on in the overworld and, bolster locations that you need to take down another one rather than sitting there and watching them fight over and over again and barely leave each other alive and then go to peace. There at the bottom, you can see a list of all the upgrades it has, and hopefully I'll be able to put out a video here soon kind of going over them. And it's also worth noting that each location will only have 3 upgrade slots, so pick carefully, don't waste them on random things. And also that with the addition of the Dwarven Milestones upgrade, that will allow you to explore area quicker around that location or that settlement. So the general exploration reward you get for selling to a location is going to be reduced in the game. Next up, we have 2 that we'll go over together kind of quickly. First, we have Smarter Teardown, which means that doors will now tear down structures farthest from the entrance if given a choice, which I didn't even know was a problem. I've never torn down anything that I didn't specifically click on, so apparently if you can just, tear down a random structure like you want one less quarry, it will always go for ones that aren't right by your entrance, so you're not tearing down your main dwarven area. And secondly, we have layer guards, which means that once you've found a layer, the areas where all the enemies spawn from, like a rat cave or something like that, when you go and destroy the initial wave of enemies and start fighting the layer, guards will progressively get stronger and start spawning out. They get stronger over time, they take longer to spawn, and the only way to stop them from spawning is to destroy the layer, which, means get it in one shot or else you're going to have a lot of strong enemies to deal with. I'm not sure if they're going to get sent in waves to your area like some enemies do, but if they do, then you're definitely going to want to make sure you take them out. Next up, there are just a handful of performance tweaks. I'm not going to go into detail about them, but overall, things should load quicker and update faster. So if you're technical, feel free to read. Other than that, we're going to move on. Also included in this patch were a handful of tweaks like buffs, nerfs, and just changes to the game. We're going to blow through the most interesting ones here, so feel free to pause and read all of them if you'd like, but we're just going to go right through it. First off, they've added the technology tailoring and garments to the knowledge tree. This contains everything to do with like the tailor workshop and, making clothes, armor, that kind of thing. In order to learn beekeeping now, you have to learn cooking, and in order to learn brewing, you have to learn beekeeping. Crabs drop more loot, so it's more worth it to go out and hunt for them, and their shells and meat should be less rare. More creatures are now going to spawn just throughout the caves, so you'll have more things to fight, more loot to gather, which will be very nice, especially for gathering bones and stuff like that. Overworld factions now have opinions of each other at the beginning of the game, rather than everyone starting out as friends, so now you might find settlements already at war right when you start out your game. That'll be cool. The Skulker armor has been buffed, making it look like they forgot to add an extra 0 when the game was released, and the Militia armor has been buffed as well, just both increasing movement speed. And finally, when you sell support beams to granite pillar... I know, I'm just going to leave it in. Finally, when you support... Oh my gosh. And finally, when you sell support beams and granite pillars to overworld locations, the settlement's fortification will be increased, like with granite chunks. The most important of these, in my opinion, is the job broker will now show the skill level, even for jobs where the dwarf is missing the required tool. Before, if you had a dwarf like without a pickaxe, it would just show as 0, even though, they could still mine and still had a level. So this will be really important for making sure that you're actually selecting the dwarf with the best level to give the best tool and give that job, rather than just giving it to a random one. And then also the drill volume has been lowered, so now you won't be deafened whenever you accidentally scroll past a drill. And the best one on here is the Fixed D1 Kupul of Taispo. The final thing we're going to go over in this video is the large amount of bug fixes they had. I'm just going to name off a few that I've personally found to be issues, but feel free to once again pause and read through everything on your own. First of all, claiming the last item of a kind as input should no longer block the crafting queues of other inputs. So for example, if you're trying to make bone ash, using one spider leg won't require you to find another spider leg rather than just swapping that out with 2 bones. Let's see. Dwarves who end up on a cliff while falling asleep will now fall off of it rather than just falling asleep hanging there and then get stuck in the wall when they wake up. And finally, for the AI, dwarves will no longer craft items they are disallowed from crafting based on the profession. For gameplay bug fixes, now the biomes near the entrance at the start of the game will always be level 1. You don't have to worry about a level 2 one spawning right there and spawning really hard enemies. Destroying vaults will no longer just destroy all the coins in them, it'll actually make it transfer to a different vault. Goat cheese is now technically a food, apparently it wasn't before. And then finally, the teardown works on plants and is no longer like a multiple selector thing, it's just a individual selector so you can pick a building properly rather than tearing down a ton of things in one area. And then there at the bottom we have a few UI fixes like aligning buttons better and modifiers showing up properly. In the patch notes, there was one last big chunk of information just talking about the stability of the game. I'm not going to read off everything in there. You can if you want to. I'm not even going to list all of them. This is just a partial selection of the list. But pretty much they all just amount to the game should crash less and cause less like major runtime issues. But once again, feel free to go read them if you were having any particular issues and want to make sure they got resolved. And with that, we are at the end of the patch notes. Thank you so much for sticking around and watching and dealing with my awkwardness, and thank you to the developers for continuing to be active in the communities and update this game. I hope I can get a bunch of new stuff for this game out here soon, so please subscribe to be notified when that happens, and comment below what you'd like to see. Thanks, and have a great one.